Welcome to Big Business This Week. I'm Aisha McKenzie. The dust of the 2024 election is beginning to settle as former President Donald Trump will return to the White House as the 47th president of the United States. So what will a second Trump term look like? Joining me now to discuss is presidential historian and the former United States Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tevi Troy. Tevi, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Aisha. I really appreciate it.
So tell me, how is America reacting to the results of this election? Are people surprised by the votes that have come in?
Well, look, the number one positive thing about this election is that it was definitive. There was no doubts. You didn't have to wait a week. There's no questions of whether there's going to be riots in the streets. We know who won the election, and now we can move on from that. Obviously, a lot of people are unhappy with the result. Obviously, more people are happy with the result given the vote totals. But that's the American way. I've been on winning campaigns. I've been on losing campaigns. I know it's better to win. It absolutely is. But whatever happens, you move on, and we try and have a peaceful transfer of power, and that's the way the democracy works.
Right, and you talk about how it's definitive. It was very early Wednesday morning. Trump was already giving his victory speech. Overall, he received more than 290 electoral votes. So why do you think Trump won so handedly?
Well, I think she wasn't a great candidate, to be frank. I think that was the number one problem. But the other thing is the message that Donald Trump is this evil, fascist, racist, whatever you want to call him, who's going to destroy the country, is hard to sell when he was already president and he didn't destroy the country. So it's just the message didn't work. You needed to have a positive vision for what you wanted to accomplish. You may like what Trump offered, you may not like what he offered, but he said what he was going to do. He was going to rein in illegal immigration. He's got ideas about tariffs. He was going to try and stop the international chaos that we've seen in the last few years. So he had a vision. He said what he was going to do. The other side just said he's bad. And that message doesn't work.
So I do want to get to the Harris campaign. So immediately after the election results were clear, you have people like Senator Bernie Sanders saying that the campaign was disastrous, and also another Congressman, Richie Torres, saying that campaign, the Harris campaign, did not focus on the working class people. What are your thoughts on that, and do you believe that to be true?
Yeah, I love the Sanders thing. The campaign was disastrous. Why didn't you say anything while the campaign was going on? I mean, you can't really do anything afterwards. So I don't find that kind of comment productive. But yeah, I think the Democrats do have a problem with working class voters. And I think it's because they don't address the issues of working class voters. You saw surprising gains with the Trump campaign, with the Black community, with the Hispanic community, with the Jewish vote. These are usually core Democratic constituents. And they said, we don't like what the Democratic Party is offering. It's too woke. It's too removed from what we need. It's too focused on these kind of microaggression issues that are big on college campuses, but not big in people's lives.
I want to touch on the Democrats a bit more in a bit, but we want to get back to Trump. So both of the candidates didn't just use mainstream media to get their voices and policies heard. They went to a lot of podcasts that they know has a wide reach and, a different audience than those who sit and watch, the major networks. Do you think that was effective in this campaign?
Oh, my gosh, absolutely. I mean, that Trump interview with Joe Rogan, first of all, it was downloaded 45 million times on YouTube alone. That's way more than people watch CNN or MSNBC or NPR. So huge reach. But the second thing is, I already mentioned that the Democratic campaign was just to demonize Trump and say how terrible he was. But Trump, in that Rogan interview, he sat for 3 hours. He was way more thoughtful and way more knowledgeable and substantive than people had been led to believe about him. And people said, wow, all this attack on him, I just don't know if it's accurate.
And you talk about how he sat down with Joe Rogan for that many hours. He was also on X, speaking with Elon Musk. So I want to talk about Elon Musk and how he was a part of this campaign. Do you think he had any impact? And how was it for President Trump to be on X talking about his policies as well for a few hours?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about this. As you know, I just wrote this book, The Power and the Money, about CEOs and presidents. I talk a lot about Elon Musk in there and how he dealt with the first Trump administration. And look, with this administration, he went all in favor of Trump. And people talk about how the Democrats have celebrities, whether it's Beyonce or Cardi B or whoever. But Elon Musk himself is a celebrity. He's not a Hollywood entertainer. He's not a musician, but he is a big celebrity and he has fans. And I think that had an impact. The other thing is, obviously, he gave a lot of money to the campaign, but he also helped with exposure on Twitter/X. He really knows how to use those platforms. And in fact, when Trump was president, Elon Musk gave him a compliment saying he's really great on Twitter. It was called Twitter at the time. So I think Elon Musk was a very helpful person for the campaign. And also the idea of this government efficiency drive and that Musk would be in charge of it. I mean, Musk's secret sauce in his companies is he looks for inefficiencies and he tries to drive them out. And a lot of people want government to be more efficient. So I think people like that message.
And Musk being the owner of X and being able to, decide what is shown on the accounts. I mean, I'm on X constantly. Do you think that also played a big part in a lot of people hearing about what Trump wants to do for the country moving forward?
I don't think it was his ownership of X per se, but he has a huge following on X, so he could get a message out. And I'm not constantly on X. I do post, but I would see those Musk messages. They would kind of break through the noise, and whenever he put out something big, even a relatively casual user would see it. So I think that had more of an impact.
President Trump won. He's president-elect now, and in his victory speech, he's talked about uniting the country. What are the odds that he can actually do that with the climate we're in politically?
Well, look, people who disagree with him, the Democrats who hate him, you're not going to unite those people. But he's not trying to unite the talking heads on MSNBC. He's trying to unite the American people behind a vision of prosperity and jobs and relative calm in the world. And if you get the American people, if you get 60% of the American people to say, hey, I'm kind of happy with where things are, that's unification for how things go these days. And I think he'd be very happy with that.
All right, so let's talk about next year. How's that transition of power going to look like between Biden and Trump? And will this be like an immediate reversal of any Biden administration policies and Trump's going to come in and do it immediately? Or is this going to be an ease-in period for this new Trump administration?
Well, the way it works in these administrations, and I've worked on transitions, is there are some things you can undo immediately and will be undone. So maybe Biden's border declarations, where he got rid of 94 executive actions Trump took that made it harder for illegal immigrants to get in the country, that gets undone immediately. But a lot of this other stuff has to happen legislatively. And even though Trump won the Senate and probably won the House, it's not so easy to get legislation through. As Barack Obama learned back in 2009, he had almost a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate. And briefly, he did have that filibuster-proof majority. He had a big majority in the House. And he still struggled to get stuff done. And in fact, got very few pieces of legislation passed after his first 2 years. So the legislative stuff and the administrative actions are in different categories. Then there's the personnel stuff. Trump's going to have an easier time getting his people confirmed because he has control of the Senate. But we're already seeing indications of infighting among different factions within the Trump world. And I think Trump should really work to try and avoid the constant infighting that I think dragged down parts of his administration last time.
Right, because now this is a totally different group of people, and a lot of his old administration is not there anymore. So this is now his second time coming in, of course. And some are saying that he will be less reined in than his first term. So from a historian perspective, how have presidents acted differently in their second terms?
Well, this is a different second term, as you said, because nobody else has done this kind of gap between the terms except for Grover Cleveland. But I think second-term presidents have often had trouble. There's been the curse of the second term. Clinton had his impeachment in the second term. Reagan had Iran-Contra. Obama had a lot of problems with the House and Senate in his second term. So second terms are hard. But I think leaving and coming back may give a fresh energy, and you can actually get rid of some of the people who were lingering too long in the last administration and start with new people. So maybe there's an advantage to having a second term that's not a consecutive one.
Do you think we're going to see the same President Trump as we did the first term, or he may be a little different?
How many times did you hear in the first Trump, I like Trump's policies, but if only he wouldn't tweet crazy stuff? Well, if he wouldn't tweet crazy stuff, he wouldn't be Trump. You can't change who he is. It's kind of like the old thing about the frog and the scorpion. He is who his nature says he is, for good and bad. And so you're going to see some crazy stuff on Twitter. You're going to see him insult some people. So that will be part of the overall picture. It's part of the cake. But I think he knows the way government works better now, and I think he will bring with him some people who know how government works better. So maybe that will lead to more efficient operations.
All right, and let's talk about the Supreme Court. Will he have more power based on the Supreme Court's decision on immunity?
No, I think that was overblown. I don't think that's going to really change how he acts or behave. I think that's just a broader question of whether we want to have this society where you can have lawfare, where you can be going after political figures in the legal realm, and which I think has been problematic on both sides. I would love it if President Biden would pardon Trump going in, and then Trump would pardon pardon Hunter Biden. So both sides would say, okay, we're going to pull back from this lawfare. We may disagree with you politically, but we're not going to go after you legally. I think that would be better for everybody. And that would be a real step towards unification. All
right, Tevi Troy, presidential historian, thank you so much for joining us here on Cheddar. And coming up, how will a second Trump term affect the markets and the overall economy? More on that after the break. Welcome back to Big Business This Week. With the 2024 election behind us, Americans are preparing for the upcoming 4 years. Economically speaking, numbers have looked good since it was announced Donald Trump took back the White House. But will it last? And what can we expect to see happen in Q4 as a result? Jason Betts, private wealth advisor at Ameriprise Financial, joining me now to walk us through. Jason, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, so how does an election year normally affect the markets here in the U.S.? And with the race called so early on Wednesday, did that make a difference?
It's the market. So the markets do things that we don't understand and don't expect all the time. So it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what we can expect for the rest of the year. Clearly, the market had a bit of a material rally yesterday. I would even say part of that might have been in the form of a relief rally. With Donald Trump getting elected, this idea that we could see a sunset on these corporate taxes at these lower rates is probably now off the table. Additional tax cuts are now on the table, and I think that's what we mostly saw play out in yesterday's rally. And as far as where we go from here, I think that's going to be mostly data dependent, what we hear as far as economic data, and as far as also what we hear in terms of policy or suggestions on policy moving forward.
So you talk about those big tax cuts that we may possibly see in this next presidency. How much of an effect is that going to have on the U.S. markets? And is that something that is going to change the way a lot of these corporations react to the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in such early stages right now. It's really hard to try to predict or try to infer what potential larger tax cuts impact would have on the markets. I would say that the bigger issue is there is no longer a material uncertainty, and we all know the markets hate uncertainty. So the uncertainty of in terms of could taxes go up, both for individuals as well as for corporations, has been alleviated now. I think the market will be looking ahead now in terms of what it can expect or hope for in terms of tax cuts. Clearly, if the consumer has more money to spend, on paper that looks better for companies selling more widgets and services. We all know it can be a little bit more complicated than that. So it'll just kind of, not to sound like a broken record, but it'll depend on where the data goes and where the information comes in from here.
Okay, so let's talk about the immediate then. Q4. Are we already seeing some results, an impact on Q4 from this election?
I think yesterday is a clear picture that the answer is yes. The main difference, in my opinion, over this next quarter, what we may see a more tempered version of the Trump bump as compared to 8 years ago, when we saw a market that was up multiple days with the Dow over 1,000 and really continued that trajectory for most of the fourth quarter. With these valuations where they're at right now, both in the markets and especially in these technology mega caps, the valuations appear stretched. That could make it a bit more of a challenge to see the same type of upward trajectory in this fourth quarter that we saw when Trump was elected 8 years ago.
Okay, so you said the markets, you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes you never know, but how long does it take to normalize the markets again after a major event like a presidential election?
Yeah, typically not very long. I can think of years ago. I'm going off memory, which is always a little bit dangerous, but when Obama defeated Romney in that election, the market, for lack of a better way to put it, Wall Street deemed that Romney was a better candidate for the markets and for the economy. When Obama was reelected in that second term, we saw a couple-week period where the markets were down probably about 10 to 15%. Another 2 weeks after that time period, the markets were already snapped back to their pre-election level. And that can happen both on a sell-off as well as a rally. We typically get mean reversion occur within weeks or at the longest within months of any type of big event-driven movement in the market, like what we're seeing, what we saw yesterday, and what we may see a little bit of pour over into today.
All right, let's talk about the everyday Americans now and the jobs report. So October, the numbers are looking a little murky. 12,000 jobs only added last month. That's compared to the 254,000 that were added in September. A lot of economists are saying the hurricanes that happened made a big impact, the Boeing strike. So what does that say about the current state of the American economy? Or is this kind of a one-off because of those issues we're having across the country when it came to the hurricanes and came to Boeing?
Yeah, great question. My gut is that it's more of a one-off. And as we've seen with this jobs data pretty much all year, we're seeing it come in all over the place. We're getting blowout positive data when we're expecting it to be, a lower number, and we're getting disappointing data when we're expecting a higher number. We're seeing downward revisions. We're seeing upward revisions. It's really hard to get a read on. So anytime we're looking at it in 1 month period of time, or even in a quarter period of time in a vacuum, it's really hard to apply that to where the future trajectory is going to be as it applies to jobs or unemployment, or really even how the market trades that moving forward.
So I guess now's not the time to make the biggest decisions when it comes to investing or anything like that.
Yeah, I'd be a little bit measured and probably try to be tempered and disciplined in the way that I handle my investment decisions right now as an investor.
That's good to hear. So let's talk about the GDP. What does the 2.8% GDP increase reported last week mean for the economic temperature leading into Q4 and next year?
Yeah, I think it's more of a business as usual number. It shows we're continuing to grow. Is that sustainable? That remains to be seen. Certainly, it would appear that way. But like I said before, we're seeing the data remains relatively strong. We are seeing some mixed data here and there, some revisions up and down. But as a whole, things look solid, and the trajectory looks relatively good. And so with the quote unquote Trump bump that we saw yesterday, I think we're seeing underlying optimism among Wall Street traders in light of that. And so that all being said paints the picture for probably a pretty good picture in the fourth quarter, albeit, like I said before, probably more tempered just due to the current pricing and the valuations of the market at these levels.
And we know at the forefront of this presidential election, a lot of everyday Americans, working class people are worried about their money. So what do you predict when it comes to 2025 fiscal year, and any tips for preparation?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, the market is it's an enigma, and it does things we don't understand all the time, especially over the short term. Over the long term, to your point, it normalizes. My main message to our clients and my main message to investors at this point is please, please, please take a look under the hood of your portfolio and look at your actual allocations and look at your concentrations. How much do you have in certain sectors and in certain names? And if you've got a material amount of a percentage in any sector or any individual names, especially in that technology space, it's hard to argue with now not being a good time to at least trim some of those high flyers and rebalance the portfolio. And just check yourself in terms of how much risk you're actually taking. Investors have actually kind of gotten away from rebalancing, have kind of held on and continue to ride that wave, especially on the AI and technology trade. And there's no doubt they've been rewarded for that. But just because you have been rewarded for it doesn't mean that that's necessarily something that you want to continue to do. So I would advise investors to go back and adhere to certain disciplines and guidelines when it comes to investing, when it comes to diversification, and to not have too many eggs in just a few baskets. And I think that more investors than they realize are sitting with a lot of eggs in these technology and AI space baskets right now. And tech needs its place in the portfolio. It's part of diversification, and it's irrefutably a great opportunity, but with that comes material risks as well. Years and years and years ago, we did see the NASDAQ composite drop 77% over a 2.5-year period. That can happen, even though it doesn't feel like it can right now. I don't believe that will happen again, but it is a testimony to the importance of making sure you're keeping track of how much concentration you have in certain sectors and how much concentration you have in certain names within your investment portfolio.
Really, really good advice, Jason Betts. Thank you so much. Now, coming up, the business stories you may have missed this week. Don't go away. Welcome back to Big Business This Week. Let's get to some of the business stories you may have missed this week, specifically what's going on with Boeing. I want to bring in the writer of Cheddar's Big Business This Week, Peter Green. Peter, good morning. So what can you tell us about the strike ending at Boeing?
Good morning, Aisha. Well, the strike ended on Monday. The majority of the 33,000 odd machinists who have been on strike for 2 months signed the deal. Not all of them were very happy. They wanted more. In particular, they wanted the pensions that they used to have. Company says they can't afford it. People are living too long, so they have shifted to a 401k like the rest of us working stiffs. So this means the workers have to be back by next Tuesday at the latest, but it's going to take a while for production to ramp up, and that's only the beginning of getting Boeing back on track. They've got to start producing more planes. They've got to convince the FAA that they can do it safely. Remember that door blowout that happened in January on the Alaska Airlines flight? Well, Boeing could be producing up to 80 odd planes, 737s a month out of their factory, but right now they are hoping to hit 30 a month as they ramp up. And meanwhile, the company is bleeding cash.
So there's a lot going on there. The workers aren't happy, a lot they need to do to catch up. So what does this mean for the other turbulent issues that are happening at that company?
Well, the cash is the big one. Last week, Boeing raised $20 billion by selling shares to investors and banks and people like that. That gives them some cash, which they're going to need to ride out the next year. On the plus side, they just got an order for 10 new planes from Taiwan's airline. That was an order split 50-50 with Airbus, 10 for Airbus, 10 for Boeing. But the real big thing they've got to do is win back the confidence of both passengers and airlines, and they've got to come up with a new plane. The 737 that is their real workhorse is a 60-year-old design. That's older than most of us. They've got to come up with something new, something that is a lot cheaper to build and a lot cheaper to fly. And then they've got to make sure that the workers are actually enthusiastic about this. They are spinning off some of the units that haven't been working very well, like their Starship industry, their space business, where they've left 2 astronauts stranded in the International Space Station until February. And they've got to reel in some of the pieces that they had hived off, like Spirit Aerospace, which makes fuselages in Kansas, which are then taken on a train to Seattle, where they're reassembled.
And you know,
so it's a lot of work for the new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, but there's really no choice. This country can't afford not to have this company, and in fact, the rest of the world can't afford not to have one of the 2 main aircraft suppliers.
And I want to touch on the consumers, like you were saying, for those who frequently fly and, use Boeing planes. Should there be any concern? You talk about the design being old. I'm sure more people are saying they want something modern. So should people be concerned about this?
There's nothing to be concerned about. I mean, that's the great thing, is that the FAA and various other regulators keep a really, really tight eye on how these planes are built. The workers, one of their big complaints was that they felt that safety standards had gone down and the company was pushing them too hard to move stuff too fast. All that, I think, is going to change, but really the only safety issue they had was that one door panel blowing out. The other 2 issues had to do more with Boeing's management not communicating certain changes to the software back in 2018 and 2019 when those 2 planes crashed. But otherwise, you're a heck of a lot safer flying a Boeing airplane than riding a bicycle.
Well, that's good to know. Peter Green, thank you so much for that. And make sure you go to cheddar.com/BBTW to sign up for our weekly newsletter. And that's going to do it for us this week. But don't go anywhere. There's more Cheddar up next.